comments on that.
We welcome you back to the Issues of Life radio show right here on WTGF 90.5. Again, you can join us in the conversation. 994-3747, 994-0823, truthradiofm.org. Listen online around the world. It all works. That's the great thing.
Call in, join us. We'd love to have
Please
you
do, please
on the
do.
air with us today. I want to shift gears a little bit now and talk about the trials and storms of life. Now, when I say storms of life, that could mean a physical storm, just like we're facing, but also dealing with just sickness. Could be sickness, could be pressure that you face on your job. These are minor. Some of them are minor, but they may not be minor. I mean, we look at things and we look at things differently. But I think about the Psalm 107. I want to read this to you before we get into the actual discussion about those things. But Psalm 107, beginning with verse 23, says, "They that go down to the sea in ships, these do business in great waters. These see the works of the Lord, and his wonders in the deep. For he commandeth and raiseth a stormy wind, which lifteth up the waves thereof. They mount up to heaven, they go down again to the depths. Their soul is melted because of trouble. They reel to and fro and stagger like a drunken man, and are at their wits' end. Then they cry unto the Lord in their trouble, and he bringeth them out of their distresses. He maketh a storm a calm, so that the waves thereof are still. Then are they glad, because they be quiet. So he bringeth them into their desired haven." Now, Psalm 107 is a series of events of that nature, the things that we go through in life, the things that man in general goes through in different settings. And the purpose is so that we might become thankful, so that we might honor God for who he is, so that we might recognize him for who he is. If we didn't have hurricanes and earthquakes, if we didn't have sickness, if we didn't have financial reversals, if we didn't have these things, I'm of the opinion now, and this is just my opinion, I believe I'm right, but or I wouldn't hold that opinion, but my opinion is if we didn't have those things, we would truly be wicked people. We would never give God a second thought.
Well, when you analyze our sinful nature and the way Romans chapter 3 describes us, I would have to agree with that. If we didn't have, as you just said, if we didn't see, Romans chapter 4 says the goodness of God leadeth thee to repentance.
Yeah.
But for most people, his goodness don't work.
Most people have to get something more severe before they can think about his goodness.
But his first method is goodness. Things, small little things that we take for granted, like oxygen. These are all things that he does for so that we'll look up. But for most of us, it doesn't work. So he has because of us, he has to resort to other methods.
Yeah. You know, I spoke with a friend of mine recently, and just a few weeks ago, and he was telling me that he was laying in bed one night, and his heart began to race, and he began to break out into cold sweats, and he really truly thought that he was going to die. It was in his mind, it was a near-death experience, and it got his attention. Now, he says he's a saved man. He's actively involved in the church. He's involved in ministry, and so it's not that he's out here living in an ungodly fashion, but that got his attention, and he made some drastic changes in his life immediately because of that. And so when you get to the place, I know this. When I was at sea, back and I had the experience that I related to you about those 50-foot seas, that experience got my attention. Now, I don't know that I was about 18 years old at the time, and I don't know that I actually thought that I was going to die, but I know this. I recognized the power of an almighty God, and it wasn't long after that I began reading the Bible. I was searching for religion already. I was searching something. I didn't know what I was looking for, but I was looking into religion. By that young age, I already discovered that alcohol and illicit sex and all of those things, they were all dead-end streets. And so I began looking into religion. And it was during some of those times, especially that time in Alaska, that God began to get my attention. He began to get my thoughts directed toward Him. And it was through some of those experiences that made that happen, that caused, that at least added to that taking place.
Sure.
Now, Paul, as long as I've known you since, well, for a long time. I've known you since you were a teenager, I believe. I'm not sure when we first met.
You knew me as a kid, but we really got to know each other. We moved here about 18 years ago.
All right, but I mean, I knew you when you were still in your fallen. You
Yes,
were
sir.
what, like
Yes, sir.
9, 10 years old, something like that.
Yes, sir, something like that.
So it's been a
Maybe
long
even
time,
6.
and you've been in a wheelchair since I've known you.
Yes, sir.
And I even in all of that, I never really considered some things until you and I took a trip recently. You and I took a trip to New Orleans here a few months ago, or 2 or 3 months ago, maybe longer than that. Maybe no, it's been longer than that. How long?
Yeah, it's been almost a year.
It's been a year. And
doesn't seem that long.
I really didn't realize what you go through on a day-to-day basis, being in a wheelchair, until we took that trip. And then, of course, since then, you and I bring you to the radio station sometimes, and we travel a little more together. Just getting in and out of the car is a trial for you.
Yes, sir.
And I'm not trying to bring attention to your person, but Paul's in a wheelchair, and he goes through things on a daily basis that you and I, who have good legs and walk around, don't have to go through. And what does that do in your life? Does that do anything in your life?
When you look at, because I have been in a wheelchair my whole life, and when you look at how rebellious I was in my teen years and in my 20s, when you look at how rebellious, and I've always known the truth. My family they raised me in church, but when you look at how rebellious I was and how just indignant I was toward every kind of authority, the wheelchair probably saved my life. I mean, if I had 2 good legs underneath me, I honestly don't know what. As much trouble as I got in spite of the wheelchair, I can't imagine the trouble I would have gotten into, without the wheelchair. So, like we said, the goodness of God leading. I mean, it can see the trials because this is obviously, we were talking about storms in the previous segment that are of our own making, but we don't want to leave you with the impression that all storms are of our own making, because certainly there are things in life that we have to go through that we couldn't have foreseen, we couldn't have controlled. We had no, this is the way it is, and you may not understand it all, and a lot of times people that have a storm that they feel like they didn't have a choice in, they become bitter. I've been bitter in my life, but when you look at things, and not to sound quote unquote super spiritual, but if you look at things in a proper perspective, anything that happens to us that's not hell is a blessing.
Yeah.
Anything that happens to us that's not spending eternity in hell is more than we deserve. And sometimes you just have to, because again, I don't know what would have happened to me had I had to.
That's one of the things that I never did understand, having known you since you were young, very small boy. And when I really got to knowing more about you after I moved here, you were living here and I moved here. But then to be a smart individual and you are an intelligent person, you sure were dumb.
I sure was. Some of the foolishness that I got involved in, and part of it was because I was bitter and because I always felt like I had something to prove and had kind of a chip on my shoulder. But it is to our detriment. It is to our detriment when we don't submit to a creator, when we don't let God be God, and sometimes we don't understand why He does what He does.
I don't want to get too personal, but do you think the wheelchair had any influence on your bitterness? The fact that you were in a wheelchair, you think you resented God for being in a wheelchair?
Well, yes, certainly. I mean, I don't know if it was, it was never a conscious thought. Well, I'm gonna go out and do this but I think looking back on it now, they say hindsight's 20/20. I think looking back on it now, that was certainly a part of it, because when you're a teenager and you're in a wheelchair and your other friends are going out and getting jobs and getting girlfriends and and you're just wondering, well, am I ever going to have that type of life? So what you do is you don't want to think about the future, so you live in the moment. And people who live in the moment, most of what they do is foolish.
Yeah.
People who don't look to the future, people who just want to have, whatever you're into. I mean, I was never into drugs and alcohol and things like that, but it's whatever you're into to have fun, to keep your mind off the future. And when you get those people to slow down and think, most of those people, or at least I was, are better people to some extent.
So really, it's how you respond to trials. It's how you
Sure.
respond
Sure.
to storms.
Sure.
We talked about the individual in New Orleans that was in his attic calling the news media won't help, but if he had just responded properly to start with, knowing that it's coming, in the Proverbs it says, "A prudent man foreseeth evil and hideth himself, but the simple pass on and are punished." So if we're prudent, we're gonna take heed to things. We're gonna be looking out for the future. We're gonna be concerned. I'll tell you before it's time for a final break, our last segment. And in our last segment, I want to deal with how we ought to be responding, the positive way to respond to storms.
Well, I mean, are we taking a break now?
We're taking a break.
Yeah. We'll get back to this in just a second on the Issues of Life radio show right here on WTGF.
I missed my cue.
90.5.
Yeah, the cue had to do with when we come back.
That's your